Reading with your kids.
Hola, ni hao, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, mahaba, moni muli wanji, namaste, jambo, bienvenidos. Hi, my name is Jedley, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We are coming to you from the beautiful neighborhood of Reedville in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. We are so delighted that you're joining us in our mission to help families grow closer through reading. Please be sure to subscribe to the show on the iHeartRadio app, on Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Spotify, Stitcher Radio, wherever you find your podcasts. Our guest today is Jessica Speer. She's here to celebrate her nonfiction guide to friendship. It's called BFF or NRF, the Girl's Guide to Friendship. Before we invite Jessica into the studio, I want to invite you and your family and your BFFs to a really fun event. The Reading with Your Kids podcast will be appearing live at the Lowell Kinetic Sculpture Race. It's happening September 18th in beautiful Lowell, Massachusetts. Now, people, after they heard me make this announcement, they came up to me and they said, "What is a kinetic sculpture race?" Well, it's a lot. According to the website, kinetic sculptures are all-terrain, human-powered, art-sculptured, made from repurposed materials and engineered to race over road, water, mud, and sand. The Lowell Kinetic Sculpture Race strives to inspire the engineers and visionaries of the future by promoting the synthesis of the STEM fields, the arts, disruptive innovation, and physical activity. All I know is that it looks like a lot of fun, and we are so excited that we are going to be there. We would love for you to visit our Reading with Your Kids tent at the Lowell Kinetic Sculpture Race on September 18th. You can win some books, and you might even be part of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. It's all happening September 18th in beautiful downtown Lowell, Massachusetts. The Reading with Your Kids podcast at the Lowell Kinetic Sculpture Race. Right now, we're going to zip on out to Steamboat in Colorado to welcome the author of BFF or NRF, Girl's Guide to Friendship, Jessica Speer. Hey, Jessica, how are you?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
I'm really excited because I know I'm going to learn something today. I think I know what BFF is, but I have no idea what NRF is. Can you kind of fill this old man in?
Sure. And NRF is Not Really Friends. So this book is actually, it's a nonfiction book that grew out of a friendship program I ran for girls. And it's a girl's guide to happy friendships.
Ooh, talk about a needed book.
Yes, and especially right now where girls' friendships are just in a, even a greater state of flux with the pandemic and coming out of isolation. So, this book was originally supposed to come out, right as the pandemic was in full swing. But we decided to hold it, which was a great call. And I even had a chance to kind of go back and do some edits because it's a changed world. So it comes out in July, and really I'm hoping will help girls navigate as they head back to, more normal school, more normal schedules, and back to their friendships.
Yeah. Now, I before anybody out there listening has their head blow up, we understand that, girls and boys, they all have the ability to be great friends and do everything in the world, and we support girls. But there is a difference in the majority of girls. Their relationships are different. They seem to be more complicated.
Yes. And there's a lot that goes into that. And so the audience, the ideal reader of this book is 8 to 12. And what I've learned, working in schools is during that time frame, things start to bubble up a little more for girls. So the counselors dealing a lot more with issues within the girl world. Not to say that things aren't happening with boys at all. They absolutely are. But in this book, I really wanted to address kind of what is happening in girl world and what those stories are. The book is filled with, actual stories I would hear over and over again. So my hope is that, this will be really relatable. But during this time frame for girls, what's interesting, I think what contributes to all of this is they're starting puberty. Okay. So there's some changes going on there. And when boys and girls begin, this process, they start to, see their friends as their primary support system and pull away a little bit from family. So as you can imagine, that's a big deal, so there's a lot of, weight placed in these friendships. During this period, girls' confidence levels also drop. So if you throw that in the mix as well. So there's just a lot going on, which is what makes, sometimes this a period of change and sometimes struggle for girls.
Yeah. Boy, I remember when I worked with kids and especially when I was running an after school program, and if somebody asked me the difference between boys and girls, it was, if a boy has an issue with you, you'll know about it in a second because he's going to punch you in the nose. Yes. And then you're going to be buddies with him like 10 minutes later. Whereas if a girl gets upset with you, you're not going to know about it for a couple of weeks. It's just going to sit and simmer and bubble up. And is it that, kind of, it's a simple way of describing what I used to observe, but is that still pretty much what we're seeing a lot of times?
That's a perfect explanation, kind of the simmering behind the scenes. Sometimes, that girls don't know exactly where they stand in these friendships and they're changing a lot. I think that's something that really starts to peak during this period is a lot of change because of everything that's going on. Lots of different levels of skills. There's this one study that I love to share with parents. A developmental psychologist at UCLA followed 6,000 people as they were entering middle school. And in that 1 year alone, 2/3 of them changed friendships. And that's just 1 year. But in that one period of time, 2/3 of them, had changed their friendships. So, one of the things I really focus on in the book is just bringing some of these honest truths to light. So if girls, as they enter this stage, they realize that, actually this is a period that's full of change and that's okay. Mm-hmm. So not getting threatened by that, not creating stories that, hey, we must not be good enough or they must be horrible people. So, trying to not get attached to any stories like that, but realizing this is a part of life where there is a lot of change. Mm-hmm. And everybody does have different, skill sets and learning things, mistakes are common. So just trying to change the narrative around this phase so that girls come in a little more prepared.
Yeah. Interesting. One of the things you said that kind of surprised me was that typically at this age, 8 to 12, girls tend to lose a lot of their confidence. Mm-hmm. What do you think? Is that because they feel themselves changing and they don't feel in control of that?
There's a lot of things that go into that. One thing that feeds into that during this stage of, really early adolescence, girls get into this rumination thing in their heads. So they really start to, second guess themselves, really, rethink things over and over in their heads. So that creates a little bit of self-doubt, which they then carry into relationships. The other thing I think that feeds into that are all these changes in the social dynamics. So they might not feel like they have this really great grounded support, so they're pulling away from their families a little bit because they're at that stage in their life where they really want to rely on peers. But that reliance on peers is on real shaky ground because there's so much change going on. So that kind of feeds into this, almost a little sense of groundedness. And I sure remember that when I was that age. If I had to describe myself during that age, I always think I was like a flag flapping in the wind, just not exactly sure. And, one of the things that inspired this book is when my daughters hit this age, I saw the same thing. I'm like, oh yes, I remember this. And that reminded me of the stories of so many women and girls. So then I just dove in. I kind of just dove right in and started the research on this book.
Yeah. I'm curious, how did you do the research?
Well, first, I, of course, dove into books. There's amazing books out there. So, when my girls were struggling, I dove into some authors that I love. I don't know if you know Trudy Ludwig, but she does amazing social emotional books for kids. So I dove into that. But then also on the adult side, reading what's out there. Dr. Lisa D'Amour, she has an amazing book about girls in adolescence called Untangled. So I was really first of all, just soaking in all this information. And I started to think about just some other truths about friendship I thought would be helpful. So in my head, I started to think about this framework, which kind of appeared over a couple years, but I wanted to test that out. So that's when I started a friendship program, because I wanted to see, would this framework help girls navigate? So working in schools, I started some friendship groups, which actually weren't only with girls. I had girl groups and boy groups and mixed groups, but I was starting to just see what resonated with kids and what was helpful, and working through their stories and their struggles. And that's really kind of what ultimately shaped the book from start to finish, because kids are so amazingly and wonderfully honest. They would tell me that, oh, no, that we can't do that, or that's not going to work, or yeah, that is helpful. So, and that's what landed me with writing this book.
Yeah. So we're at an interesting point right now. Probably this is, well, not probably, this has never happened before in the history of mankind. We've been locked down for a year. Our kids have been locked apart from each other for a year. They've only been seeing each other for the most part on screens. Those friendships change, but they kind of change. There's a natural way that they kind of change, because you're together and you're together on Monday, and then Tuesday not as much, and then Wednesday, and you kind of grow apart slowly. This is like, wow, we were best friends in March of 2020, and then I didn't see you for a year, and you've changed. And how can we best support our kids as they go back into this, what could be a really frightening social place for them? Some of them miss their friends, but I'm imagining a lot too were like really comfortable, like, oh, I don't have to deal with all that drama in my life. I can just shut down the screen. But now I'm going to get thrown, and we are just throwing them right back into it.
Yes, that is such a great point. And you chose the word fear. And I think there's a lot of that. Imagine after not being in the lunchroom for, well over a year, and all of a sudden having to enter the lunchroom, and, what is that going to look like? And my sense is it's going to look really different. So as caregivers, as teachers, as parents, I think just starting to talk to our kids now about being really open to change. In a normal year, there's tons of change, but like you said, it happens. We can kind of feel ourselves through that change. This is going to be a real abrupt change. So, just helping kids stay open to newness, stay open to new friends, stay open to changed groups, because, when I look at I have two daughters, and they've had 2 birthdays in the pandemic, and that is a significant portion of their lifespan. Mm-hmm. So, they themselves are different people. So they're going to connect with different people in different ways. They both come up with new interests and hobbies over this. So, for all of us, continuing our adaptability, bringing that back into schools, being really open, and just embracing those big emotions. It is going to be kind of scary, and that's okay. Okay. Yeah. So when we are scared, what do we do? What do we do when we walk into that lunchroom? Take some deep breaths, stand up tall if you can, maybe make eye contact with one friend you think you might be able to sit with. So even talking through those conversations so the kids have a little plan in their head, so they're feeling ready.
Good point. I love that you reminded us that this has been a significant part of kids' lives. I'm almost 100, so a year out of 100, it's like 1% of my life. But when you're talking about a 10 or 11-year-old, that 1.5 years that they've been locked down, that's a tenth of their life to this point. And that's a huge chunk, and it's a tenth of, and it's an even bigger part of the life when they've been thinking. When you're 2 or 3 years old, you just kind of wander through the world and everything's new. It's wonderful. This is It is. It's really challenging. And I do think we really need to take a breath as parents, as adults, and realize that this was big for us, but it's bigger for our kids because it's been a bigger chunk of their lives.
Yes. And in that big chunk of their lives, they haven't had a chance to practice these skills. They haven't had a chance to practice, hey, how do you meet a new friend? Hey, how do we resolve conflict? How do these face-to-face interactions work? So we're all rusty. Kids are especially rusty. So yeah, just being that support, helping them realize, not everybody might be at their very best, because when we're acting out of a place of fear, which, a lot of kids will be when they get back, we might not be on our very best behaviors. So, being flexible, realizing, seeing that, staying open, doing the best we can, and realizing everyone else is doing the best they can too.
Yeah. You mentioned walking into the lunchroom for the first time. I'm really hoping that one of the things the pandemic has done is encouraged grown-ups to kind of rethink places like the lunchroom. Do we really want to be throwing kids into the lunch?
I know.
It's not a real healthy place.
Right.
You just think about it. It's like, hey, let's throw all these adolescents into a big room, 300 or 400 kids together in a room, and there's not a lot of supervision, and just have at it.
Right. That's a great point. Maybe we over the summer we start to rethink, what's a way to ease them in, so it's not from isolation to large groups, So yeah, that's a great thought. I hope a lot of schools think through that, because it's a huge shift.
Yeah. One of the things we touched on earlier on, and again, it's a stereotype. Not every girl acts like this, and there are certainly boys who fall into this category. But we talked about with girls, when there's an affront, when there's we make a girl upset, a lot of them, it just simmers. It doesn't come out right away, and it just simmers. Do we need to worry that something that was said kind of offhandedly in April of 2020 over Zoom that hurt someone's feelings is going to come back in the fall when our kids are going back to school? Do we need to prepare our kids for that possibility?
That's a great thought. I don't think kids tend to hang on for that length of time. But what I do see happening is, because kids don't exactly know where they stand in their friendships, they'll show up and maybe start making assumptions right away based on what happens in these first few days of school. If they used to be friends with so-and-so and all of a sudden, so this person is sitting with somebody else, I feel like there might be some immediate reactions to what happens in these first few days, which will be, who knows what's going to happen in those first few days, so I think, I think the best way we can guide kids is just encourage them to just really stay open, just all we can really do is be the best friend that we can be. That's all we can control. And friendships do change throughout our lives, and that's okay. I've got this one diagram in my book. It's called the friendship pyramid. And at the very tippy top of that period are our close friends. And the caveat of the close friends are these are really hard to find, especially in this age, 8 to 12, it's really hard to find close friends. And when I was doing my friendship programs, that was a huge relief for so many girls. Like, oh, good. It's not just me. This is a hard one to fill. And there's often gaps, and then below that is below the tip, close friends are just friends. And there's, this includes a lot of people, neighbors, classmates, so there's a lot of imperfections in that group, so these are friendships that feel comfortable, but also uncomfortable sometimes. And then under that, the base of the pyramid is acquaintances. So people that, we may never had class with, but we see them, we know who they are. And, there's a whole new world of possible new friendships out there. So, just noting that there's changes all throughout this pyramid. Sometimes close friends might go back to the friends, or friends might turn into close friends, or even close friends might become an acquaintance at some point, because we had a falling out or we need to take a break. So just showing the fluidity between friendships and sharing that that's okay and that happens throughout life.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember sitting in Mr. O'Rourke's English class, which was a lot of fun. We didn't do a lot of English, but we had there was a lot of life lessons there. And one of the things he said is, if you have 2 or 3 good friends over your lifetime, you're lucky. And, being a senior in high school on the soccer team, I knew everybody at my school, and I felt I was buddies with everybody. I thought that was the most ridiculous thing I'd ever heard in my life. But it's true. Mm-hmm. It really is true.
So true. And they're rare, so those close friendships are rare and they're hard to find. And in the book, I say this might not happen until middle school or even later, and that's a relief to girls, because a lot of girls see all these pairing up, everybody has a BFF, it seems sometimes, but them. But the truth is those friendships are hard to find, and just that's okay. It'll come, but it might not happen right away.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And you said a lot of you ran these friendship groups with boys and girls. Mm-hmm. Were those friendships easier to navigate? Those friendships between boys and girls, or was that a whole other complex web of?
At this age group, it was more rare for them. This seems to be the age group where the boys are sitting with the boys at lunch, the girls. However, I found that when there was that intermixing, it was awesome, and I encourage kids to really stay open to, you don't have to have same gender friends by any means, because, when, boys resolve conflicts differently than girls do. And so it's great when there can be boy-girl friendships, and that brings a whole different dynamic. So I wasn't finding a ton of crossover, but when I did, it was wonderful. And I always encourage my daughters, to really, find some guy friends, and because they feel different, and we learn great skills when we do that. We learn how to navigate friendships in a different way. So yeah, that's a long answer to your question.
Well, no, and it is a good answer. I remember back to when my daughter was in high school, and she just refused to deal with all the girl nonsense, and all of her buddies were guys.
Yes. And that is so true. That, so sometimes, things bubble up so much in these, these preteen years that, kids get to high school and they're like, forget it. I'm done. And I know many girls like that in high school too, where they're like, I am out. I'm done with this girl stuff. And they find wonderful friendships with boys.
Just one last, this just popped into my head. That is how my daughter lived in high school, and until she met a group of Italian students. They were international students. They came, and she became buddies with these 3 Italian girls, best friends, dear friends. Is the things that we're talking about? Is it unique to the United States, or this culture, or the kind of complex friendships that you're talking about in BFF or NRF? Is that something that's universal?
I think it's pretty universal. So I think as human beings, we grow and we learn through our relationships. And sometimes those are really uncomfortable, and sometimes they're wonderful. And so I think it's pretty universal. So the friendship truths, there's 9 friendship truths in the book, and they're really universal for actually boys and girls and adults and children and people of different nationalities. They're really simple, basic truths, but they start to really become meaningful, I think, when kids are in their tween years.
Yeah. Well, we celebrate reading books with our kids of all ages. I think BFF or NRF, I don't know if it's a book that you want to sit down and snuggle up and read aloud on a couch, but it certainly is a great book to co-read with our tweens and teens and talk about over the dinner table or on the way to soccer practice or ballet or whatever it is. I think I think it would probably be a real good book to read with our boys who are tweens and teens to help them get a better understanding of their friends at school.
Yeah, my hope is, like, if I could wave a magic wand, my hope would be that, that the parent or grandparent raising the child reads it too, because I think it does offer families a framework so they don't get caught in the traps. They don't get caught in the stories or the narrative about themselves and others. When they are in those uncomfortable friendship moments, they could remind themselves, hey, remember this friendship truth that friendships do change over time. Or, hey, remember this friendship truth that everybody's developing these skills at a different pace. So these sort of things happen. So just, my hope is that it's a framework that's shared within families to help smooth out the ride.
Yeah. And I'm really glad that you mentioned grandparents, because I think grandparents can play a really wonderful role with teens. You mentioned that this is a time where it's just natural for kids. They need to move away from their parents. They need to break away, be more independent. That's a scary thing. So a grandparent can slip in there and they're loving and they're caring, but I don't think teens feel that need to break away from the grandparents. So maybe you can, as a grandparent, you can fill that role with your teen grandchildren that is a little bit more safe, and kind of have some of these conversations with those kids, conversations that the kids need to have with their parents but don't feel comfortable having with their parents.
Yes, absolutely. So another safe place for the tween to go. If they really need to talk about something, but they don't want to talk to mom or dad, they can talk to a grandparent.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Jessica, this is wonderful. Where can folks go to find out more about you and also find out more about BFF or NRF?
The easiest place is my website, which is jessicaspeer.com. It's SPEER, and that's got all sorts of information about the book and me and, and links to buy the book. But yeah, thank you so much for chatting with me.
I've had a great time. We've been speaking with the author of BFF or NRF, The Girl's Guide to Friendship, a great nonfiction book from our friends at Familius. And we've been speaking to the author, Jessica Speer. Jessica, thanks for being on the Reading with Your Kids podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Please be sure to join us for the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We have 3 great guests for you. Tara Lawal will be here with her co-author, Rich Greco. They'll be celebrating This Little Pig Went to the Market in the City. And Laretha Ward will also be here to celebrate Wipe the Slate Clean. That's the next episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Before we go, we want to encourage you to be sure to mark your calendar. 2 great live events. The Reading with Your Kids podcast will be at 2 great live events this summer. August 28th, we will be at the Connect Fest Family Music Festival. It's happening at the Cape Cod Fairgrounds in Falmouth, Massachusetts. August 28th. It's a free event, but you do need tickets. You can get tickets at fuseconcerts.org. Come on over to our booth and see our magic show. You can also check us out on September 18th at the Lowell Kinetic Sculpture Race. It's happening on September 18th in downtown Lowell, Massachusetts. We'd love to see you there as well. Come on over, see some magic, win some books, and maybe be on the podcast. Want to thank the folks who made today's show so wonderful. Of course, I want to start by thanking our guest, Jessica Speer. Be sure to check out her nonfiction guide to friendships, BFF or NRF, The Girl's Guide to Friendship. Also want to thank my team, Alejandra Doherty, Fatima Khan, Justina Thompson, Helen Frazier. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me. We all want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. And as always, thank you so very much for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.